Hi, my name is Aya. You're watching Aya Reads, and it's September, which means, in my opinion, fall has already begun. Even though when I'm filming this, it is hotter than it has been all summer. And I know technically fall or September is still summer, but to me it feels like fall. So I am here to give you 10 fall recommendations. So I have one dark romance to share, four paranormal romances, two historical romances, one thriller, and then two young adult books, both of them being paranormal. And there's going to be timestamps below for if you want to skip to a certain genre or subgenre. So starting with the dark romance, I actually have an entire series to share with you, and it's the Kingmaker series by Sophie Lark. So technically, you could read this before reading any other books, but if you want it to be the most enjoyable, you should read all the books in the Brutal Birthright series by her, plus the first two in her Underworld series. But if you don't want to do that, she does explain who everybody is. This is basically a mafia Hogwarts, which is why, to me, it's such a good fall recommendation, because you're in this remote island that is very, in my opinion, like it feels like it rains a lot there. Let me actually, I think there's a picture of, yeah, so this is what the school looks like. So very Hogwarts like. And I don't know, it just, when I read it, I felt like it was fall. Also, you start, this book is the first one you start every year around back to school season, which is obviously also very fall to me. So basically, this story, the first book follows Leo Gallo, who goes to this Kingmaker school, which is basically a Hogwarts for mafia kids. In this school, you basically get trained to be a part of the mafia, either as an heir or as an enforcer or as a spy or as an accountant. And when you enter the school, because all the kids of the mafia go to this school, so obviously there's going to be rivals there as well. Basically, you have to sign your life over to the school, and the school deals with the repercussions of you challenging that, basically an eye for an eye. So if you harm another student, the same will be done to you. If you kill another student, you will be killed. And you follow Leo, like I said, he's the son of Sebastian Gallo, who we follow his book. His book is the sixth book and the final book in the Brutal Birthright series. Him and Anna have been friends for years. They basically grew up together. Anna is another child of the Brutal Birthright series. Her parents' stories was the second book in that series. They've been friends forever. Nothing really happened between them until they get to the Kingmakers, when feelings develop between them. But somebody else attends Kingmakers, and it's Leo's cousin, Dean Yenin. So Leo's mother is Dean's aunt. So his father and Dean's father and Leo's mother are brother and sister. Twins, actually. Because of events of the Brutal Birthright series, there's bad blood between the families. Dean thinks that Leo is this golden boy who's been given every opportunity, whereas Dean's living in a slum, basically. And Dean basically is the Draco Malfoy type character, and Leo is very much the Harry Potter type character. If you love Harry Potter and you love Mafia, I would highly recommend this series, and it just brings all the fall vibes. And because this island is also so very isolated and anything can happen, it is a little bit spooky, and it is also a dark romance because you follow Mafia families. I flew through these books, even though they're pretty big. All of them are around 500 pages, but I flew through this series. I would recommend the first four. I wouldn't really recommend the fifth, because the fifth also doesn't really take place at Kingmakers, and it's my least favorite. But the first four were definitely solid books, in my opinion. Now, for the paranormal recommendations, the first one is the Stay Spell series by Juliet Cross. This is 6 books, and you follow the 6 Savoy sisters. And the Savoy sisters are a family of witches, and you follow them as they fall in love with different paranormal creatures. 2 of them fall in love with a werewolf, 2 of them fall in love with a vampire, and 2 of them fall in love with Grimms, which Grimms, I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about them because you discover their secrets throughout the series. The first one, we follow Mateo, who's a werewolf, and Evie, who's a witch, like I said. And Mateo has been cursed, and his curse is basically that his werewolf cannot come out when he's supposed to. So that results in his werewolf just constantly yammering at him, even when it's not the full moon, which is not supposed to happen. And his werewolf's name is Alpha, and it's very hilarious. These books, the main reason I'm recommending them is because it's paranormal. It does take place in New Orleans, which I'm pretty sure doesn't really have fall. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's very hot there all the time. They are very humorous. If you haven't read a whole lot of paranormal, I would highly recommend this series because it does read contemporary with some paranormal aspects. Yeah, I love this series. My favorites definitely are the third book and the fourth book, but I do have a feeling that if I reread this one, it's also going to be a favorite because I love werewolf stories. Werewolf stories are my favorite type of paranormal books to read about. So yeah, I would highly, highly recommend this, and it definitely will get you in the mood for fall, in my opinion. Same with X-Hex. This is a mix between Charmed and Gilmore Girls, in my opinion. X-Hex, you follow a girl named Vivi, and a guy named Reese. Both of them are witches. Well, she's a witch, he's a warlock, I'm pretty sure. They met 9 years ago and had this whirlwind romance of a couple months. They fell in love, and then he left her pretty shittily. So she and her cousin decide to put a curse on him. But in the 9 years, she's been stalking him a little bit, doing she's been social media stalking him a little bit, and she realizes that this curse did not work because he's living a pretty good life. 9 years later, he returns to this small town that his family actually founded, and all of a sudden things go horribly wrong for him. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong. Vivi realizes it's because of her curse, so both of them have to figure out how to mitigate this curse and how to deal with it, because his curse is also affecting other people in the town. And feelings develop again. It's a second chance romance, and it's really, really good. This is another one of those, if you've not read a whole lot of paranormal, this would be a good starting point because it reads definitely contemporary with hints of paranormal. I really love this book. This just has a special place in my heart. It's definitely a comfort read, in my opinion. I loved their relationship. It's very funny as well. This does have a second book, and I would also recommend that as a fall read. This one is definitely my favorite by leagues. I really, really love this one. Like, the whole small town vibe reminds me of fall. The whole witchy vibes remind me of fall. Like, everything about this book reminds me of fall. And I believe this also takes place around Halloween, which also obviously is very fallish. The Fever series by Karen Marie Moning. I put this under paranormal. This, I believe, technically is an urban fantasy. This follows Mac, whose sister was murdered in Ireland. She's from the US, so she travels to Ireland to find out about her sister's death. There she runs into this mysterious guy named Barons. She discovers that the Fae are real and the paranormal is real, and she's trying to find out what happened to her sister. This, like I said, takes place in Ireland, so it's very rainy setting, and it just thinking about it reminds me of fall, especially the setting, the bookstore, the places they go is very fallish to me. I read the first 5 books in this series revolving Mac. I know it does continue on, but I heard not the best things about it, but I did really enjoy the first 5. Don't go into it looking for a paranormal romance because it's not really that. You really truly follow Mac's story. There is a romance in here, but it doesn't really happen until I believe the 3rd or 4th book even. But there is some romantic tension before that. Mac is an interesting character. I think she's pretty over the top. This was written in 2011 and it does read that way, but it was very enjoyable to me. It is kind of campy in that way, but especially the setting, the vibes definitely remind me of fall. And the last paranormal is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This is both a paranormal and a dark academia sort of book. I do have to say, I did try to read the second book and I did not love it nearly as much as the first one. I actually DNF'd it, so I never really continued on after reading the first book, but I do feel like the first book definitely stands on its own. You follow I believe, does she know she's a witch? Anyway, you follow a witch named Diana, And she's also this PhD student, and she's researching something magical. And while she's doing that, she discovers this ancient manuscript called Ashmole 782. And people have been looking for this, and nobody really has found it until she found it. And when she does, all these supernatural creatures start flocking to her. So other witches, other vampires, and other demons. Those are the three supernatural creatures in this book. And one of them being Matthew de Clermont, who's a vampire. And there's a TV show of this book, and he's played by one of my favorite actors, mainly because I think he's like the most attractive person in the world. Played by Matthew Good, who I think is so very attractive, and that is also exactly how I pictured Matthew in this book. This takes place in Oxford, in England, or in the UK. Like I said, the whole dark academia setting, the whole paranormal setting, it's very fallish to me. This is a quintessential fall read, in my opinion. If you've not read this one, I would highly recommend it. I believe her powers also revolve around weather in some way, so that also, like, I believe she calls like a rainstorm at one point. So yeah, this book definitely reminds me of fall. If you've not read this one yet, I would highly recommend it. And I would recommend the TV show. I only watched the first season. I should really continue on, because like I said, I didn't really enjoy reading about this, like reading the second book, but maybe I would enjoy watching the second season, mainly because of Matthew Good. Maybe because I do have a part of me does want to continue on with the series. Just the second book, the setting of that book really prevented me from continuing on. So maybe the third book, once they're back where they were in this book, I might actually enjoy it. Anyway, I'm just rambling now. Definitely read A Discovery of Witches if you're looking for a good fall read. Now for my two historical romances. The first one is actually a historical paranormal romance, and it's After Midnight by Teresa Medeiros. This book I really love. First of all, I love historical romances. It's one of my favorite genres, and I especially love when historical romance is combined with another genre, like historical romance fantasy or historical romance paranormal. So in this book, it is a mystery, so I cannot tell you a whole lot about it. I cannot tell you the name of the second book, so please don't look that up if you're interested in this book. After Midnight, if you follow Caroline, I believe their family is going through a hard time financially, and then one of her sisters, the most beautiful, gets courted by a viscount, but he's rumored to be a vampire. So they go, and he's courting her sister, and she's determined to kind of not have them get together, which brings them in forced proximity. But throughout this book, he's being very shady and he's being very suspicious. And throughout this book, you question, is he a vampire or is he not? And the resolution was very good in my opinion. Historical romances often remind me of fall for some reason. And this one especially because it does deal with a paranormal twist. And I don't know, the setting, the way England is described in this book, it reads very fall to me in the second book also. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book. I really, really loved this series. It's only a duology, so you'll fly through them. Another good historical romance it says so in the title, It Happened One Autumn. So this is the second book in the Wallflower series by Lisa Kleypas. Each book follows a different season. So the first one is summer, the second one is fall or autumn, the third one is winter, and the fourth one is spring. You can read them without having read the other ones, and this one is definitely my favorite in the series. I absolutely love this story, and since it does take place in fall, it is perfect to read during fall. This book follows Lillian and Marcus. Lillian is an American who is very free-spirited, very wild. She has a sister, and their parents are very rich, and they came over to England for them to marry the gentry in the UK. And Marcus is, I believe he's an earl, and he's very important, and he's very stuck up. And in the first book, they already had some encounters, and he's just not impressed by her at all, and he thinks she's very uncouth and not prim and proper, and she thinks he's a stick in the mud. And this book brings them close together. So this is very much a hate to love. and when they come together, it's very, very passionate and fiery, and I really loved it. I loved this Grump Sunshine. I loved him softening for her and her kind of maturing for him, because she's also very young. This is an age gap, as most historical romances are. I really loved it, and I would say you can read this book at any time, but since it is called It Happened One Autumn, there's no time as the present to really read this book during this fall season. I really, really love this book. Like I said, it is my favorite in the series, and it's one of my favorite historical romances of all time. So I would highly, highly recommend this one. Now for the only thriller is Verity by Colleen Hoover. If you've not read this one yet, I would highly recommend it. If you've not read a whole lot of thrillers, I think this could be a very good beginning thriller. It is, and if you are like a big romance reader, I think you could start with this one. You follow Loan, who's a ghostwriter, I'm pretty sure. Jeremy hires her because his wife, Verity, who's a very prolific, very famous author, she's very sick. I believe she's in a coma. Her publisher wants to finish the series. They decide to hire a ghostwriter, and to do that, she has to live with him and his wife and their child to go through her notes and outlines. And while doing that, she discovers like sinister secrets about Verity. And she also falls in love with Verity's husband, Jeremy. And like there are some creepy things going on here. So yeah, that also adds to the ambiance. This takes place in, I believe it's Vermont, I think. Which I'm not from the US, but I'm pretty sure Vermont is very fallish. I don't know. I think that I believe it is like, it's not at the South. I believe it does have actual fall seasons, and I think this does. I don't know, it just feels fall to me, maybe because it's a thriller. Yeah, it is very creepy, and like you follow this like house, but it feels like a haunted house because Verity is still up there and still like maybe doing shady things. So yeah, I really thought this was a very good book. I don't know if I would read it if you're a big thriller reader, but if you've not read a whole lot of thrillers, I would recommend it. When I read this one, I hadn't read a whole lot of thrillers, and I really did like it. And now for the two young adult books. The first one is How to Hang a Witch by Adriana Mather. I read this one a couple of years ago, and I really was surprised at how much I really loved it. You follow Samantha, who's a descendant of one of the witch hunters in Salem back during the days of the witch trials, and she actually moves to Salem, and she instantly becomes a pariah in the town because a lot of the people in the town are actually descendants of the witches that were hanged all those years ago. And she goes to live there, and there she meets a boy who may or may not be a ghost, and she may or may not fall in love with him. I really love this book. I love the whole romance in here of them falling in love. I really love the love interest in this book. And I thought it was an interesting twist on the whole like witch thing. You know, the fact that she's actually a descendant of the witch hunter in this, like back in the day. It does take place in Salem, which obviously adds to the ambiance of the whole fall mood. It does take place around fall, I believe. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think, when was this published? It was published in 2016. I believe I read it around 2020, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would highly recommend this one. And an interesting fact actually is that the author is actually Adriana Mather, and she's like the actual descendant of this Mather witch hunter guy. So that was also an interesting tidbit. I believe she talks about it at the end. Yeah. And last but most certainly not least is The Nature of Witches by Rachel Griffin. I mean, is this not just like the most fallish type cover ever? So this is, you follow a girl named Clara, and in this world you have a different type of witches, and pretty much every witch can control a certain season. So you have like summer witches, fall witches, winter witches, stuff like that. And you have ever witches who can control all the seasons. And you follow one of those ever witches, Clara. Very interesting premise that it ties with climate change, actually. Because it actually says here, for centuries, witches have maintained the climate, their power peaking in the season of their birth, but their control is faltering as the atmosphere becomes more erratic. And then all hope lies with Clara, whose rare magic is tied to every season. So basically she's the answer to climate change, pretty much. Her power changes with the seasons, and you actually follow this, like this book follows you through all the seasons, but to me it does scream fall the most. Does it actually start with fall? No, it actually starts with summer. But like, I don't know, I think just the combination of witches and then this cover as well. Her power is the most interesting in the fall. It just like, I think it's a good time to read it in my opinion. But since it does, you follow all the seasons, I guess you could read it at any season. But to me, like this book just reminds me of fall. So those were all the books that I think you should read during the fall. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you have any good recommendations of books we can read during the fall season. I would really love to know that. If you've gotten to the end of the video, definitely leave me a leaf emoji, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.